Um, and, and keynote, that sounded a little bit too big for me. So Robin told me to think about it and just talk about social work, which I love. So I'm here. So, social justice. If I were to ask everyone in the room what they thought the definition of social justice was and what it meant for social workers to make change, I think social justice would probably be pretty simple. We'd all come up with a bunch of different definitions of social justice. And when it came to making change, that would be a bunch of different ideas. As there's as I look at the room, it's very diverse. There's lots of different people here. We probably have different ideas about what change is, how hard change is, and that sort of thing. So I'd like to start with the definition of social justice. I took this from the NASW website. Social justice is the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. Social workers aim to open doors of access and opportunity for everyone, particularly those in greatest need. That sounds simple. So why is change so difficult? So, I'm going to offer two reasons. Number one, I think change is hard because when we start to think about change, we think about different people. There are sometimes opposing viewpoints. We think about making macro change, which requires people from diverse backgrounds and perspectives and differences to collaborate on common goals. And that's usually kind of hard. As Robin stated earlier, I just completed my first year at UCF. I'm originally from Southern California, and I went to college in Arizona. So after moving here, I quickly realized that the East Coast and Florida was different. The biggest difference was our communication styles. So sometimes I can come across as a little bit over the top. My students call me out the box. They say, Dr. Chapple thinks outside the box. I don't know what the box is. I just can't fit in one. So that's good. I usually also speak my mind. Sometimes people think that might be a little bit confrontational, but I'm not confrontational, I promise. But for me, I don't like those little things, sometimes if we don't agree, to fester and turn into these enormous things that we can't solve. So I like to talk things out. I tell my students all the time that we name all elephants in the room, all of them. And that becomes kind of difficult as well. So at times, I've learned to tone my personality down a little bit. And then at other times, I'm continuing to name elephants and think outside the box. The second reason I think that change is hard is sometimes we forget why we decided to become social workers in the first place. Many of us came to social work because we want to advocate for vulnerable and oppressed populations. For most of us, social work is personal. For me, I became a social worker because of my life experiences. My oldest daughter was born deaf, and she was diagnosed at 10 months old. I remember meeting with a social worker after diagnosis. I didn't know she was a social worker until I was halfway through my BSW program. I just knew I would meet with this woman who tried to help me to figure out what I needed to do to raise a child with a disability. And I can recall, even though my daughter's 22 now, about 22 years ago, some of the things that she said to me. She told me to research everything I could get my hands on about deaf people and deafness and communicating with the deaf. I incidentally, along the way, got a degree in deaf studies. She said, make the decisions that are the best for my child. It didn't matter if the doctors or the professionals or whomever disagreed with me, do what I thought was best in my heart for my kid. She said, don't be afraid to challenge those professionals. She also said, change my mind if I need to. So if I decide to do something and I find out that it's not right, change my mind, change course, it's okay. And the last thing she told me was to be my daughter's voice, which I thought was really interesting because my daughter's deaf. So this advice preschool when my daughter went to school, and I became involved with IEP meetings. How many of you guys are familiar with special ed IEP meetings? They can be very intimidating for parents, particularly when we don't have tools or licenses or all those fancy letters behind our names as we're looking at people. So I happen to disagree with the school administrator on something that they wanted to do for my daughter. And I stopped the meeting. I said, no, I'm not going to sign this. And they got mad at me and kind of went back and forth. But when I went home, I read everything that I could get my hands on. I read up on the IEP, I read up on the process, I researched, I did everything I could. And when we came back to that next meeting, I was prepared. I had goals. I knew what I wanted. I knew where I wanted my daughter to go. And I got the IEP done the way I wanted it done. Well, I didn't stop there. So after that, I started talking to all the other parents. The school hated me. They're like, oh, Kara's mom. I started talking to all the other parents, and I started telling them, you know what? If you tell them, they'll do it. You know, your kid can get this. Did you know that? And then I started organizing these little support groups for parents and other kids with disabilities. I didn't know, but I was doing social work. So incidentally, that kid that I fought for is getting ready to graduate from college with a degree in psychology. He's also applying to grad school, and I'm holding out for the MSW. But I tell you all that to say, I am certain that I wouldn't be speaking to you if it wasn't for my daughter and if it wasn't for that social worker. So, I believe everything happens for a reason. I know some people don't think that, but I really do. I believe that the good and the bad happens, that everything is not happenstance, I guess I could say. I believe the good things happen to remind us that there are good people in the world and that most of us have a good heart. And I believe bad things happen to teach us valuable life lessons. So this reminds me of a quote by Gandhi. We've all heard it, but I try to live by it. Be the change you wish to see in the world. In using Gandhi's quote and some social justice principles, I'm going to offer 6 strategies for making change. And if any of my students are in here, they've heard this over and over again. So the first one is, as social workers, we need to remember where we came from and what our values are. A lot of us get away from what brought us to social work or who we are. It's really hard sometimes, particularly like me, you know, growing up in one part of town, you know, from a certain family or whatever, or having a kid with a disability and not having any experience about this, and then trying to continue to bridge those gaps. But we need to know where we're from so that we can empower our clients so we can know where they're going. Funny story. I teach cultural competence and social justice at UCF. And I ask my students to work really hard to look inside themselves every semester. It's particularly hard when we're looking at ourselves. We don't want to know that we have biases. We don't want to know that we have disagreements with people. We don't want to have these things. So last semester, I don't know how this happened, but I feel like I doubled down. I taught on cultural competence on the undergrad and the graduate level. So I was all things diversity all day, every day. One thing that came out quite a bit when the students were talking about me in my classes were that they were very emotional, they said. They would come out of the classes emotionally drained. It's really hard for you to look at yourself and some of the things in which you don't want people to know about you, or some of those hidden feelings or biases that you have for people. So I asked them to look at themselves and to practice empathy by putting themselves in their client's shoes, and to try to think about their clients as human beings, and to try their best to avoid judgment. That was really interesting. You know, I had a lot of students who told me that they had biased grandparents, or that they had different things happen, and that they couldn't work with certain groups and that sort of thing. And we just talked about, well, what are you going to do if you encounter these never any judgment. You know, I tried to create a safe space so that we could all get through the process together. The second one is that we must practice social work with empathy, compassion, and love, regardless to if we understand or if we agree, and regardless to who our clients are. Unfortunately, in our society, some people are valued more higher than others. And as social workers, we come in contact with people that are normally at the lowest point in their lives, and that they need us to guide them. Well, it's really hard if we aren't practicing compassion and love and empathy. My third thing is to remember to look for our client's strengths. Everybody has strengths. Sometimes we have to find them. Sometimes we have to stop and take a deep breath and pause and think about it, but everybody has strengths. So we have to look at those. Number 4, we have to remember that to meet our clients where they are. I know it says it in all of our social work literature, but sometimes we can see the answer, or we can see what they should do, or we even put ourselves in the position of saying, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't live like this. I wouldn't have said that. And it's not for us to say that because it's not our lives. It's their life. And we're there to help them find the path, or to help them get on the path. And if they're not ready, we're also there to be patient with them so they can get where they need to go. That brings me to number 5. We must remember that we all have our own biases, and we must try to understand our triggers. So, I went to Arizona State for all 3 of my degrees. So I got a bachelor's and a master's in social work, and then I got a PhD in social justice. Throughout that time, I had a professor. It's so funny because whenever I talk to her now, she just goes, oh my goodness, you came so far. And I remember she used to shake her head at me when I was in